Hello, Blakehurst. Happy Memorial Day. Today, I have Mr. Ken Hutcherson. He's been here at Blakehurst for 4 years, and he was a technical sergeant in World War II, flying on planes and had 26 different raids in his short career for the U.S. Army Air Corps.
I really tried to enlist when I was 17, but my father wouldn't sign for me. Had I enlisted, I would have been in Pearl Harbor when they dropped when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Because I was going to enlist to go to Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor in 1942, it wasn't too long after that that I enlisted. I went to Fort Meade, and from Fort Meade I went to Keesler Field, Mississippi for basic training. And at Keesler Field we took all kinds of aptitude tests to find out what we'd be qualified for. And I picked radio school. So we left basic training and went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We got there on December the 1st, 1942, 20 degrees below zero. So we went to school on the third shift. We took training in building radio sets and also Morse code. We started out with Morse code and on the third shift, and so after we graduated it was 26 weeks. So after we finished that, we took tests to see if we would be qualified for flight training. We had to go through decompression chambers, take us up to about 35,000 feet, and bring us back down again to see if our ears would accommodate that type of pressure. So if we passed, we were qualified to go to gunnery school. So went to gunnery school in Las Vegas, Nevada. They were still riding horses into town when we got there. And we had the base there, so we started flying in little single-engine planes. And we were in the back cockpit, and the pilot was in the front, and we shot at tow targets. And then all of our ammunition was different color, we dipped in different colored paint. And we'd shoot at these white targets, and they would count our hits and see how we were doing. So we took all kinds of training with the machine guns and everything there. And after we finished training, we were assigned to flight crews. So we went to Moser Lake, Washington, and came together as a flight crew: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, two waist guns, ball turret, tail gunner, 10 people on a plane. So we were from all parts of the country, all young. I was the youngest one. The oldest was 27, he was a co-pilot. And so we flew night and day there, training in these beat up old B-17s. So after we finished our training there, we were assigned to a provisional group, which was a lot of planes to go to England. So we flew from there to Grand Island, Nebraska, getting ready to go overseas. And originally we were assigned to go to the Pacific, and then they changed it and sent us to England. So we flew from Grand Island to Bangor, Maine. I stayed there about 3 days and left there and went to Goose Bay, Labrador. And from there we went to Iceland. We were in Iceland for 3 days and left there and went to Scotland. So at Scotland, they took our new plane away. We'd gotten a brand new plane, and they took it away. And of course, we were then assigned to a group. We left Scotland. Well, first, we were indoctrinated as to this different sayings in England than they had in the U.S. for slang terms and all that. And so we left there and came down to Bury St. Edmunds. We were stationed at a place, Bury St. Edmunds. And that's when they lost 60 planes right just before we got there. So we only stayed there a week, and they transferred us over to the 95th Bomb Group, is which I was assigned to then. And so on my first raid, we were flying an old plane called Darlin Dolly. Beat up old plane. And after we dropped the bombs, the bomb bay doors wouldn't close, and the radio room was right behind the bomb bay. And so the pilot called me and ordered me to go and crank the bomb bay doors up because they would slow down the plane. So I went across that catwalk with a walk-around oxygen bottle, which only lasted 3 minutes, and scared to death, and put the crank in the slot there, and as soon as I started to turn it, they came up on their own. Well, I was getting back to the radio room so fast I dropped the crank. And I've written this down many times in the stories that I've told. I can still see the crank tumbling end over end from 28,000 feet. So that was my first raid. So then after that, the reason it took so long to finish your missions was because of the weather in England. And so as the weather, we were there Christmas of '43, and the weather was so bad it would just take us so long that one of the worst ones we had was February the 10th, 1943. We came back to the barracks that night. There were 24 in the barracks that morning, and when we came back that night, there were 6 of us left. The others were all shot down. So there was a lot written after the war about the big week. They knew the weather was going to be good, they predicted it was going to be good, and the third week in February 1944, we had 1,000 planes in the air. Every direction you look, you could see planes, and we flew every day. And, well, you were on oxygen, you know, and there's a book written by, called The Big Week. It just happened not too many weeks, and every day, every year, the third week in February is kind of a flashback. Where you remember the dates and times and all that. And so I'm the last surviving member of my flight crew. There were 3 of us left. We had reunions all over the country as just our 10-man crew, and also group reunions. So we had 9 in Las Vegas in 1973, which was the most we ever had out of the 10-man crew. And so they're still having the reunions. I went to the one in Philadelphia last year, and I've been my co-pilot, or the bombardier, went back in the service and married a Korean nurse. They have 2 daughters, live in Seattle, Washington. And she called me, one of the daughters called me when her father died. And I called the one in Florida, the last one left in Florida, to tell him, and he died 3 days later. So I'm the only surviving member of the 10-man crew. Well, this past, in Savannah, I contacted the daughters in Seattle and talked them into going to the reunion in Savannah. And the tail gunner's son in Connecticut, there were 3 of them. I talked him into going. So I put it together, and it was just a great reunion, and we're still in touch. And God willing, we're going to Salt Lake City in October. So it has just been a long, good life and good memories, and I've just enjoyed every minute of it. In February 1943, we went to Brunswick. That's when we came back that night. Well, the first pass they made at us, both of our wingmen went down with the fighters. So when we got back that night, there were 6 of us left in the barracks, and there were 24 when we left that morning. There were 24 men in the enlisted men's barracks, which was 4 crews, 6 enlisted men on each crew. So, well, it kind of flashback kind of shoots you down. So, well, I shouldn't tell a fun thing, should I? But okay, I'll throw this in. When we came back to the barracks that night, of course we'd been flying, and of course your faces are all swollen and red from the oxygen mask, being on oxygen for 6 hours. And of course they used to give you a double shot of scotch when they interrogated you when you got back. But of course, after being on oxygen for 6 or 7 hours, people start seeing things that weren't there. So they stopped giving them the scotch until after they were interrogated. We came back into the barracks that night, and there were only 6 of us left from the 24. And our voluntary gunner came in, and a big smile came on his face. And there were a beautiful pair of cowboy boots across it from his bunk. When he came into the barracks, he kicked his boots off and stepped into those cowboy boots and said, "I've had my eye on these for a long time." And we had a reunion in Philadelphia later on. And I said, "Pete," I said, "I'll never forget you stepping into that pair of cowboy boots." He said, "I didn't do that." So there was a lot of levity in the crew in spite of all the hard times that we had flying. So in November 1943, we went to Scandinavia and bombed Rjukan, Norway. And it was the side of a mountain, and we didn't know what it was. And I didn't really know what it was until after the war was over, when I was reading some of the history. The Germans were making the heavy water there for the atomic bomb. And it's just reading after the war, it kind of a flashback to what we saw there in the fjords. And of course, we didn't know anything about the atomic bomb at that point. So sickle accident. And I cut myself up pretty bad over my left eye. And we were scheduled to go on a raid the next morning. And I had my parachute and everything ready to go, and a flight surgeon came by and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "On this raid." He said, "You're not going on that raid." He said, "If high altitude, that'll freeze and it may put your eye out." So my crew went without me. So I got behind. They finished up. I still had 4 to go. So I was just a substitute to fill in somewhere. I flew my last 4 raids as a bombardier in the nose of the plane. And of course, we didn't have to use the Northern bomb sight there. We just toggled them out on the lead plane. But I flew my last 4 raids as a bombardier, and finished up on the 27th of October, 1944, and got off the plane, parachute over my shoulders, big smile on my face. I have a picture that one of my crew took of me when I got off the plane, my last mission. Of course, everybody else had gone back to the States except him. He was my best friend, and he just recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, they started having those honor flights to Washington to see the World War II memorial. And this friend of mine, who was my best friend on the crew, lived in Sarasota, Florida. We got word that he was going to come into BWI on one of these flights to view the memorial. I made arrangements to meet him at the tarmac when he got off the plane. I'd go down to BWI, and when he got off the plane, we hugged and cried. So I don't know how but they let me go down to the tarmac and meet him and everything. And so he's the last one that passed away that was in Florida. We wrote them letters. They asked us to write them letters, and they opened the letters on the plane coming up, just like you did a mail call in World War II. And so, but he didn't know I was going to be there to meet him, but we just wrote the letters, and they opened them on the plane and read them to him. I finished my missions. They kept me in England in charge of the Radio Shack, training new people that came in for, well, they offered me a direct commission to stay there, but I wanted to come home. But I got to see a lot of the build-up for the invasion, because being in a Radio Shack, the generals, they couldn't fly without a radio operator.
Right. And which invasion was this?
Huh?
Which invasion was this?
The invasion of Normandy.
There it is.
Normandy. So I had this call from this general. He called me up. I was there by myself. He said, I need a radio operator. I said, I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have one. He said, are you a radio operator? I said, yes, sir. He said, get a parachute and meet me at the flight line. So we flew down to where they were building up for the invasion. We saw all the gliders and all the stuff getting ready for the invasion of Normandy. And it was so cool, really, to get a chance to see that. And they had these bells, or it would ring if you came. They had these steel cables around London to discourage, for the fighters that were bombing. They were coming in bombing London, and if you got within certain distance of those, the beepers would go off in the airplanes. And here we were flying. I'm in the back in the radio room by myself, and the pilot and co-pilot are up front, and the beepers started going off. I said, General, can you hear the beepers? He said, what's the matter? You want to live forever? So, but he knew what he was doing. But anyway, it was really cool to get a chance to see all of that. And they offered me a commission to stay there, and I always regretted I didn't do it. But that's over. So then after that, I came back on the Queen Elizabeth. And on my 21st birthday, I was on a train going from Baltimore, Maryland to Miami, Florida for R&R. I'd been over there, flown my mission, and was back in the States on my 21st birthday. And then, well, life is good. Has been, regardless of all of that, what we went through. And back in the States, we sent us to refresher courses, and I went to Scottsdale, Illinois to a refresher course in radio, and I'd been flying as a radio operator. They sent us to base Shepherd Field, Texas, basic training. And finally I ended up, after going back to Scottsdale, Illinois for radio training boosters, I got stationed at Langley Field, Virginia. And we were flying 5 nights on and 1 night off, up and down the East Coast, developing the radar, looking at the cities all through the radar and everything, which we didn't have when we were flying in World War II. And it got to the point that they were so many non-commissioned officers, they started giving us KP and day room duty and all that. So they had me in a day room one day. They wanted, well, cleaned the day room, and they had asked, they wanted 30 people to volunteer to go to long-range navigation school called Loran in Reno, Nevada. And I didn't sign up at first, but this PFC there gave me the mop and told me what to do in the day room. And I gave him back the mop and went and signed up to go back to go to long-range navigation. So 33 of us got on a train. All got the car to ourselves, and they hooked us onto anything they could going west. So we lost one of them in Minneapolis. He caught up with us later, but he missed the train the next morning. But it was quite a ride going cross country there. So we get to Reno and go to long range navigation school, which is a completely different navigation system on blips that they used in the South Pacific, which we didn't use in England. And had just graduated from that school when they dropped the atom bomb. And then you just kind of were stuck there for a while, played pinochle for 7 days a week. But then we got the train back and came to Andrews and got discharged, and here I am.
Happily ever after.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Hutcherson,
Yes.
you come from a large family in Southern Virginia. I know you have a few brothers. Did they also serve in World War II?
The 3 older ones did, my older brother, myself, and my younger brother. My older brother, 2 years older than me, was with the Navy in the Pacific. And of course, I'm in the middle, I was in Europe, and my younger brother was with Patton's Third Army, and they came up to Bastogne and liberated those people in Christmas 1944.
Wow.
So he ended up really bitter, because I mean, when you play with Patton, I mean, he just really was a different personality completely after serving with Patton. But I always kind of felt that Patton may have had Eisenhower's job if he hadn't slapped that soldier in North Africa. Having been asked to participate in Memorial Day celebration in 2000.